Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a statement that Boris Johnson made to his party members at the Conservative Party conference. He said that the pandemic was a massive opportunity that the Conservative Party can take advantage of. Now, under any circumstances, I would find a statement like that rather worrying, particularly for a Prime Minister to make. But under the current circumstances, I think it's genuinely chilling. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, describing the most serious healthcare crisis of our lifetimes as a massive political opportunity, under any circumstances, like I said, is bad. We've all seen influencers in all political parties, whether they be MPs or spin doctors, whoever, talking about opportunities during a crisis. Very unsavoury. We don't really like to see it. But this is the Prime Minister saying so. Not inadvertently just happening to be in earshot of someone that reports it or sending an email that gets leaked out, but openly, online, to a party conference where not only did he know that he'd be recorded, but he wanted to be recorded. That is an even lower level of skullduggery. But that's just politics. You know, a lack of thought for the human cost of a crisis, because that's what you're doing when you're talking about political opportunity in a crisis. You're sort of ignoring the human cost of it. It's insensitive. But it is something that all political operators effectively do. It's easily done from time to time. What made me wince was the thought about what this means, because what opportunity is there that an emergency brings that is better than an 80-strong majority in Parliament? At least it was an 80-strong majority until he sacked one of his MPs. But it's still an impressive majority to call upon. And this isn't just a numerical majority. It is a fully working majority for him. It is a majority that has gleefully voted him the power to take us out of the EU single market without the safety net of a deal in place. Sure, we may get a deal, but if we do not, the blame will not rest solely on Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, because backbench MPs, Conservative MPs, had the opportunity to extend the transition period and give us more time to get through COVID before working on a deal. They chose not to. Therefore, they chose to give the government the power to take us out without a deal if that's what they see fit. And they've also dutifully voted to allow the Prime Minister to break international law and further trash our reputation abroad, upsetting international allies, to say nothing of the obvious damage that the wider bill does to the Union. Not a single Conservative MP voted against that. Not one. Not even the ones who were shouting loudest against it, like Theresa May. Not one of them voted against it. So Boris Johnson has a large majority, and one that's fairly tame on most issues, even when they cut back ultimately the worst things they let him get away with. And this gives him the opportunity to screw the country over in a way that previous megalomaniacs have only been able to dream of. So what possible further opportunity is given by the emergency when he's got Parliament in the palm of his hand? By definition, it can only mean one of two things. So one, it could, in theory, mean that the emergency has changed people's attitudes towards something that the Conservatives would previously have liked to implement, but there was too much public resistance to do so, like selling off the NHS, for example. Now, this is not the case. The emergency has not made the case for privatising our health services, because although that's what's happened, the government have pumped billions into private companies to carry out public services, healthcare services that should be done by the NHS, they've been worse than useless. They've not been making their case. You know, the emergency has not solved the idea of having airheads in key government positions either. Again, the public are dismayed by mess after mess from these cock-up merchants. It certainly hasn't sold the benefits of the supposed dream team of Dominic Cummings and his lovable sidekick Bojo the Wonder Clown. So there is nothing in Conservative dogma that suddenly looks more attractive to the public right now as a result of this crisis. So that really only leaves the other possible opportunity. The opportunity to do things without parliamentary scrutiny. Because if Parliament's going to go along with whatever you want anyway, but they're going to talk about it first and get it in the media, the only other possibility is that you get to do things without Parliament talking about it first, without democratic checks and balances. In March, under cover of COVID, Boris Johnson urged Parliament to vote him through wide-ranging emergency powers in order to deal with the fast-moving situation without the speed bumps of the parliamentary processes that would bring with it. Now, on one level, that is fair enough. COVID is a genuine emergency, and a government does sometimes need to act quickly. It was not immediately obvious to me why existing emergency legislation was considered insufficient, but there it is. I'm not an expert. However, although the government have certainly used their emergency powers to bring in measures quickly, in a way that would have been impossible for Parliament to process with such speed, there have been a few issues. So the first is that Johnson's government have not been informing Parliament of their moves. Now, it's one thing to say Parliament would take too long to decide these things, so we need to decide them, but it's quite another to then say, but also we're not going to let you talk about it either, even after the event. Now, there's no point in having a debate about it. We've done it. That's all there is to it. We're going to move on to the next thing we're going to do without telling you that either. Secondly, the government have been introducing new criminal offences without any parliamentary consultation, and sometimes they've introduced those new offences with only a few minutes warning in the worst cases, literally minutes. Imagine being arrested one day for walking your dog. It's illegal to walk your dog with a bright blue leash now, sir, says the police officer. Oh yes, you say. Since when? Since about half an hour ago, responds the officer. Absolutely balmy. And yet this is what has actually been happening. Not with bright blue dog lead, you understand. That's a metaphor. The third thing is that the government have been spending billions, lots of billions of public money on huge contracts to private companies without any scrutiny from Parliament at all, either before or after the event. Some of these contracts weren't even related to COVID. There's an awful lot of legal action being taken over some of them, because just because they have these emergency powers doesn't mean that they can get to ignore all the norms when it comes to allocating public funds. But we'll have to see what the courts say about that. But nonetheless, normally these sorts of things would have discussion, and they are not having. And the Conservatives have used this emergency as a giant bung for their donors and supporters. And last week, Parliament voted to allow Johnson another 6 months of these powers that even Conservative MPs are not happy about. They don't like the way he's using them. But Johnson had them completely hostage. He knows that they can't just vote against them. They tried to amend them, but that didn't work. It wasn't legally possible. If they voted to stop these powers now, then they'd look like they were stopping the government from doing what's necessary to beat the virus. That would be a terrible look. Doesn't matter whether you're a Conservative MP or a Labour MP. That would be a dreadful look. And I would call this irony, but it's probably quite deliberate. By making such a mess of the pandemic, Boris Johnson is extending the length of the emergency situation and therefore extending the length of time which he will have these emergency powers. If he'd adopted a zero COVID approach and a competent zero COVID approach, then okay, yes, we would still be living with the pandemic. It would still be around, but it would be much more under control. And maybe the need for these emergency powers would be much less clear. As such, it might well be that we could have returned to at least normal parliamentary mechanisms. But this does not suit Boris Johnson. He enjoys ruling by decree, and so I'm sure does Dominic Cummings. Come to that. Announce this tomorrow, Boris. But what if my MPs don't like it? What are they going to do about it? Nothing. Don't worry about it. Just announce it, will you? This is clearly the opportunity that he was talking about at the party conference. I don't know whether it was as a boast or whether it's to persuade backbench MPs who have been a bit awkward. They have been carping. They have been saying, look, you need to involve us a bit more. He may be trying to put pressure on those MPs by selling it to the wider party membership of the opportunity, as he calls it. You know, he likes his monarch-like powers, and it's clearly not an opportunity to do any good for the country or for us. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.